Welcome back to another episode of the Industry Edge podcast, where we talk with leaders working in and for some of the hardest working industries, such as manufacturing, distribution, construction, and more. Some of our past guests include Michelle Hairline of Culture Max, CEO of Rise 25, Jeremy Weiss, and President and Principal Chair of C12 Middle Tennessee, Dwayne Murray. This episode is brought to you by KNC Marketing. KNC is a full-service marketing agency that helps B2B industrial companies grow their brand and increase sales. They serve as either a fully outsourced marketing partner or a supplement in-house marketing teams. To learn more about KNC's brand development, marketing, and website design services, visit kncmarketingagency.com. Now, today I have with me Charles Scott, an executive mentor who helps business leaders succeed professionally without undermining their personal health. He's a Nashville native and has spent 14 years as an executive at Intel Corporation and has published 2 books and is the co-founder of a nonprofit organization, Team C Possibilities. He was named Speaker of the Year by CEO Peer Group TEC Canada and offers mentorship workshops to executives interested in crafting a meaningful life in an intentional way. Charles, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Danielle.
You've done a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here today. So I'm just going to dive right in. So leaving a 14-year career at Intel to become an adventurer and mentor is a really big pivot, going from IT to adventurer. So what was the moment or realization that pushed you to take a leap to do that?
I was turning 40 years old. When I turned 40 years old, I wrote out a list of life goals. And number one on that list was dream up adventures with my kids. And so my 8-year-old son and I decided to cycle the length of Japan. And so I took a 2-month unpaid leave of absence from Intel. This was the summer of '09. So this is the middle of the Great Recession. So timing was pretty bad to do it. My boss said, dude, if I were you, I'd want to stick around and protect my job. We're going to lay people off. And I thought about it and I almost didn't do that trip. And then I thought, is there ever really a good time to cycle the length of Japan with an 8-year-old? And I said, not only are you not going to fire me, you guys are going to sponsor the trip. And they did. It was like a Jedi mind trick. Like they're not the drawers you're looking for. You will sponsor the trip. No, I mean, I'm being silly right now. But what I really did was I explained the value of it. And then I made it win-win for Intel. So like one piece of advice I give to people who feel a nudge to do something adventurous like that is figure out how to honor the commitments you've made in your life, your personal life and professional life, and pull off the thing that gives you vitality. And so I did that and it worked great. And I just took 2 months off. It all worked out fine. And then I came back, but something inside me had changed. I felt a nudge. And within 2 years, I left Intel. And the week after I left Intel, I went to Iceland and I cycled the circumference of Iceland with my 10-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter. And my 10-year-old son was on a trailer cycle, and my daughter was in a bike trailer with a seatbelt on. So, don't put young children on their own bikes and ask them to cycle like that. That's stupid. But when they're little, like that. So we were like a 3-person train and we spent the summers doing that. In the end, I cycled over 7,000 miles with my kids and I wrote 2 books about them. And I said to my kids, like, after I die, whenever you miss your dad, I'll be waiting for you right there in the pages of these books. So these are my legacy gifts. And what I realized was there's something more for me to do on this planet. I had a successful 14-year career at Intel Corporation, but it was just time for me to grow differently professionally. And I had to figure out what that was. And that's actually what I help people do, is to find vitality in their own lives and develop in their own way. Usually you don't have to leave your job in order to do it. I happen to do that, but you can do this without changing your spouse, without changing your house, without changing your job. And that's part of what I do, is the lessons from my own experience and help other people to do the same.
That's amazing. Holy cow. What do you want to, or who do you want to be when you grow up? I want to be you, because that is so cool. How do you go? That is such a big pivot, but that is absolutely amazing. Also, I have a 4-year-old daughter and I could not even fathom doing that with her. How did your kid talk to me, which I know we're going to get into that deeper, but tell me a little bit more about, parenting can be tough, right? And those are really critical ages that doing something like that has got to be a struggle. What did you learn through that, and how did you navigate that with those ages specifically?
Well, I will preface my answer by saying these children do have a mother, and she does have opinions about their welfare. And when I told her about the plan to cycle the length of Japan with our 8-year-old, her She thought I was joking at first. And they're like, no, no, I'm really serious. And I had like 3 reasons why it was a great idea. It's like, I'm presenting to my boss or something. And she interrupted me. She said, listen, it's really simple. I trust you, but just swear to me you will keep our son safe.
Mm-hmm.
I said, well, I've already developed a mitigation strategy to keep him safe. And I said, number 1 on that list is keep him safe. Number 2, keep him safe. Number 3, keep him safe. My top 3 of all the stuff I'm figuring out. So I love my children. I wouldn't do this if it was going to harm them in any significant way. So this was the pressure on me as the adult, is to figure out how in the world can you pull off some crazy adventure like cycling 2,500 miles across Japan. We went over 10 mountain passes, by the way, or the circumference of Iceland, in a way that's appropriate and okay for your children. And I'll say it this way, kids can do a whole lot more than most adults think.
Mm-hmm.
One of the gifts you can give your child is the gift of high expectations. And one of the sad elements of our sedentary culture is that we often expect very little of our children, and we don't want them to ever be uncomfortable. And I'm different on this one. I like to proactively seek out meaningful discomfort, and I'm okay if my children are uncomfortable. I didn't say I'm okay if they're in pain or injured or traumatized. That's not okay. But meaningful discomfort that comes with trying to cycle up a mountain or setting up a tent when it's cold or rainy, right? Or studying calculus, right? Or like not giving up when things start to get hard. Welcome to entrepreneurship and living. Those are great skills. So what I was really doing with my kids was offering them the possibility of learning that discomfort's not that big a deal. And we got to do it together as a team. And that creates a bond because they saw me suffer. They saw me break down. I certainly threw temper tantrums just like they did. There are times when you get overwhelmed and exhausted. And I would get hangry, and I would just go eat something, like relax for a minute. So it's just when you do hard things, you're going to break down sometimes. But then you learn to trust each other and you start to see each other's strengths and weaknesses and work that way. This is what high performing teams do in business. So it's the same thing in a family as it is in a business. It's about relationships and how do you cultivate relationships. And one great way to do that, go do difficult things together and then figure it out when it falls apart and then try again and then learn and get better. And that's growing up. And so I think the last thing I'll say is the biggest gift you can give your children before they're 12, like birth through 12, is all of your time and all of your energy. They'll take all of it. They'll ruin your career. That's all they want. But then once they're teenagers, the best gift you can give them is to leave them alone. They really don't want to be around you anymore. So these bike trips were with my kids birth through 12, like young, not teenage years. Then I let them have, a life outside of spending time with their dad. And that was painful, but also important to understand.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's it. They will absolutely take you all of your energy if you will let them. That is so true. I love that perspective though, because I feel like you're right that so as a parent, and I know my husband feels the same way about our daughter, it's like you don't ever want them to struggle or like to, you put them in this little like bubble, but that's not real life, right? Like you want to, and so, but at the same time, it's like, yes, you don't want them in pain, you don't want them harmed or anything like that, but putting them in difficult situations to try to figure out things is also important as well. And not kind of putting them in this bubble like at those key ages. I love that perspective. That's amazing. That is amazing. Okay, so shifting gears a little bit. So your executive workshop, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's kind of what I mentioned too, just a couple of minutes ago, but focuses on recovery techniques, stress management, and intentional living. In your experience, what are 2 of the most common roadblocks that executives and people face when they're trying to kind of integrate these practices that you teach into their life?
Yeah. So the first roadblock, um, I would say, is they get agitated when they understand a concept, but have difficulty putting it into a practice. In other words, you think if you understand a concept, it should be simple or easy to put into a practice, and it isn't. So, for example, did you know, Danielle, that it's very important for you to eat a moderate amount of healthy foods and exercise regularly? Did you know this?
I did.
Oh, well, congratulations. What a simple thing. Like, if this was the key takeaway from this podcast interview, my guess is you guys wouldn't publish it. Wait, right? It's like, that's almost a platitude. Eat a moderate amount of healthy foods and exercise regularly. Well, then why aren't you doing it? Now, I'm not asking you specifically, but listening to this, who rolled their eyes when I said eat a moderate amount of food, healthy foods and exercise regularly, are you really doing it? Seriously, day in, day out, are you actually doing this? So that's a good example of a simple concept that's so simple as to be a boring takeaway from a conversation, but actually most people are not doing it. So this represents the fact that human brains in general don't have difficulty with conceptual understanding, but have great difficulty with turning concepts into practice. This is where the rubber hits the road. This is where it's hard. And so the work that I do is to help people figure out, how do you take these concepts that should be obvious, you think, and turn them into a practice? And step one is, don't assume it's easy. People feel like, now that I understand it, I should just be able to do it. No, you shouldn't. It's really hard. So what do? You look for a mentor or a coach. I play this role for many executives. I also practice what I preach. I have my own executive mentor who helps me professionally. I have a couple athletic coaches that I pay money to and train with regularly. It's hard. And then the second thing you do is you either look for or create a peer group of people like-minded who are trying to do the same work. They want to grow personally and professionally, and they hold each other accountable. So you're accountability partners for each other. So that's the first roadblock, I'd say. The second roadblock, I call this the ambitious person's trap. The ambitious person's trap is when you undermine your physical health and emotional health in pursuit of your professional goals. And it is all over the place. You'll see this all over. An example of it will be, I worked with a guy who bragged to me. He's like, I average about 4 hours of sleep a night, and that's how busy I am. Now, if you brag about 4 hours of sleep a night, that's like bragging about eating a Big Mac. It's terrible for you. There's nothing to and just read the book Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, and that will disabuse you of this assumption that somehow that's a cool thing to be able to get by on that little sleep. You need at least 7, ideally 8, if you have an active lifestyle, right? And even if you don't have an active lifestyle, it's at least 7. So the key then, so what do you do with this? The way that I help people to overcome this roadblock is we talk about work-life blend. And this is different from work-life balance. I think work-life balance is a trap. You can achieve work-life balance for a minute, and then you will be knocked off of it. So balance as an image is not a helpful image, because it's like you have to arrive somewhere and then stay there. So the chaos of life will constantly knock you off balance, and you'll be frustrated trying to get back to it. So I just don't find that to be a helpful metaphor. Instead, think of work-life blend. How do you blend together the elements of a satisfying, successful life in such a way that you create a positive feedback loop? And we do an exercise I call the wealth exercise, where you look at your material wealth, your physical health, your emotional health, your vitality, your spirituality, and you figure out, how can you invest in each one of those? All of those are forms of wealth. How do you invest in each one and then protect each one from the other, so that you've now got a positive feedback loop? The classic trap, that the ambitious person's trap I'm describing, is someone who lets the material wealth bucket, their investment in that, trash their physical health, emotional health, vitality, and spirituality. They're never around their family. They're unhealthy physically, but they're making lots of money. Well, congratulations, I guess. But that bothers me a lot. If you figure this out, for example, if you figure out what gives you vitality, like life energy, and you're kind of aligned around that, oh, you'll make more money. I have. It's crazy, but it actually makes sense. If you figure out how to invest in your physical health in a meaningful way, your emotional health will improve. These things can complement one another, or they can take away from each other. And so what you want to do is create this positive feedback loop. And that's the work that I do as a mentor and the peer groups. We're constantly doing this, and it never ends. It's a daily practice that's always hard, but really satisfying when you figure it out.
That is so true. And I feel like what you said at the beginning too about the silly analogy about you eating right. Everybody knows that they're eating right and exercise. Everybody knows that that's the answer, but yet we don't do it. What's the science behind that? As far, because I'm like an action person, and if something's not working, change it. And I don't do well with people that don't, I just don't understand it. And it's not that I'm perfect, but what is that limitation in people's brains of like, that this is wrong, or that you're doing this? What is it to
Uh,
you?
yeah, Dr. Lisa Feldman Barrett wrote a really interesting book called 7.5 Lessons About the Brain. She's a neuroscientist. And in this book, she described your brain's primary task. And when I was reading this, I thought, I guess our brain's primary task is to think, right? And she said, our brain's primary task is to manage our body's finite energy budget. In other words, your brain and my brain are constantly evaluating, what are the commitments I've made and how much energy do I have to meet them? Have you ever had a really hard day at work, for example, and come home exhausted and been fussy with people you love? You and everybody else, right? Me too. So what is fussiness? What's irritability? It's your brain making a prediction that I don't have the units of energy to deal with these needy little creatures, my children who are creating conflict out of nothing, or my spouse who wants me to do the dishes and I'd rather have a foot rub. So
Mhm.
what's going on is your brain, the irritability is I don't have the units of energy to meet all the commitments I've made, so stay away from me. So to answer your question, the reason most human beings are resistant to change, even if the change would serve them, is change requires a kind of unknowable amount of energy expenditure. And your brain would prefer to kind of keep it controlled and say, this is the amount of energy I'm going to expend. So inertia is really your brain making a prediction about energy allocation, and it knows it. But the key is to understand this is not serving you. You're eating too much food and you're sedentary. This is terrible for you. And you're going to have to expend a lot of energy to change this, but it will serve you. So you now have to kind of overcome your brain's natural tendency towards inertia of protecting energy expenditure to do something that longer term will serve you, but it's going to take a bunch of extra energy initially. There's always a resistance to that. And it's just basic, the way our brain is structured. And in this case, too bad. Sometimes our brain serves us. In this case, our brain doesn't serve us, our default.
Dang brain. Let's jack me up.
Exactly.
To jack, that's so interesting though. I'm gonna read that back so I can write that book down. My husband's super into he's a sales guy and he the everything about the brain and psychology is like right up his alley. And so I'm gonna tell him to read that and I'm gonna read it as well. That's amazing. So another question that I have, so you've completed these crazy endurance challenges that you've already referenced on, but one of them that we haven't talked about yet that when I was reading about you, what on earth? You guided the first blind runner to cross the Grand Canyon and back. So talk to me about this. And now that I've talked to you a little bit longer, just the way that you are, it makes a lot of sense of why you probably have done this. But what inspired you to do that, and how did that kind of logistically happen for you? And what'd you learn through that?
Of course. I'll start in Nashville. So, I'm born and raised in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm 57 years old. So I was growing up in the 70s. Back then there was a running boom. And my dad got into this running boom and I wanted to be like him and impress him. So at age 10, I became a runner and I got running shoes. I got a watch and I would track how fast I could run. And then at age 13, I got kind of ambitious and I asked my parents permission to do a marathon that was in Jackson, Tennessee, about halfway between Nashville and Memphis. And my parents agreed. And my dad said, not only do we agree, I'll do it with you. So my dad and I ran our first marathon together when I was 13 years old. He ditched me, by the way, halfway, and I came in last place. It was a very painful experience, but I didn't give up. And at the end, he's like, son, I'm proud of you. You set a hard goal. It proved to be maybe too much, but you didn't give up. That's persistence. That's resilience. You'll draw on this the rest of your life. So that was the beginning of what turned into a fascination with and an interest in endurance athletics. So I've done many marathons since then and a lot of other endurance athletic events. Then I enter adulthood. I made friends with this guy named Dan Berlin. His daughter and my son were best friends in nursery school. That's how we became friends. Often when the little kids are friends, the parents become friends.
Mm.
Dan has a disease called cone rod dystrophy, which is a kind of slow degenerative disease where finally in his 30s, he lost his eyesight. When I first met him, he could drive a car. And then over time, I witnessed him lose his eyesight and become blind. And, of course, he fell into despair and depression. Just imagine the impact I have on you. And I felt real sorry for him. But what he decided to do, he kind of was in despair and depression for a while. And then he decided to become a marathoner. And he wasn't a marathoner before. And he asked me to guide him in the New York City Marathon. And my first reaction was self-doubt. I said, dude, I've run lots of marathons in my life. I've never guided a blind person. I have literally no idea how to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy. You just hold a tether. And if there's a pothole coming up, you say, there's a pothole coming up, move to the right. You'll talk all the time. You're good at talking, Charles. So you'll do fine. And I'm like, there's an insult in there, but I like you, so I'm going to ignore the insult. I was more nervous the morning of that race than before any other athletic competition I had done. For the first time, the marathon wasn't about my ego or breaking my fastest time. It was a lifeline out of depression for my friend. It mattered. And what happened from that moment is I started to shift the way I related to my own athleticism. So one of the gifts that Dan gave to me is instead of just training, to beat my best times, so kind of like an ego thing, I was now being of service to others. So I needed to stay in shape, but to be a guide for others. And this is kind of like the difference between the first adulthood and the second adulthood. In the first adulthood, meaning the first half of life, we're trying to prove ourselves. We try to get in the best schools, we try to get the best jobs, we try to make a lot of money, maybe impress our friends, whatever. But the second adulthood is more about recognizing the brevity of life. You're going to die. And as you realize this and really internalize it, you start realizing how precious each moment is. And it is so much more satisfying to be of service to others. And so Dan offered me a way to use my athletic interest that I've always had since I was a kid and be of service to others. And so that was a huge learning. And that I've done a bunch since then. If you want the organization, it's called Achilles International. They have a Nashville chapter, by the way. Achilles pairs up disabled athletes with able-bodied athletes, and they do training runs each week. And then if you want to guide them in a race, you can do it. So Achilles is the organization to do this if anybody's going to get excited by this idea. What happened with me is Dan and I went on to do a bunch more marathons, including the Boston Marathon. We did a bunch of them. But then I got ambitious on his behalf, and I said, dude, let's start doing even crazier stuff. There's a race. It's not a race. There's a route in the Grand Canyon called rim to rim to rim. You're not allowed to race in the Grand Canyon. It's just a route ultra runners do to brag to each other that they did it. And it's hard. And I've done it a couple of times just to brag and because it's hard. And so we started training for it. And Dan said, I'll try. Sure, why not? You start in the south rim of the Grand Canyon where everybody takes the pictures where all the tourists are. You run down the Bright Angel Trail all the way to the Colorado River. You run the base, then you run up the rugged North Rim, and you turn around and come back the same way you came. It's 46 miles. And it's a hard 46 miles because of the elevation change and the heat and all that. As we researched it, we couldn't find another documented account of a blind person who'd ever done it before. And so we issued a press release, and the press liked it. We were in CBS Evening News, we were in Fox News, we were in Outside Magazine. And from that experience, we created Team See Possibilities, this nonprofit where we take on kind of crazy endurance challenges that would be hard for anybody, but we got a blind guy doing it. So people are like, wait, what? It gets attention. We raise money and give it away in scholarship form to students who are blind, college students who are blind. And Dan mentors them monthly and sets the bar high. And he says things like, you're going to focus on your ability or you're going to focus on your disability. You hear that line? This is my favorite line of his. When he was in despair, when he lost his eyesight, he was focusing on his disability. He said things like, I can't see my kids' faces anymore. I have to ask my wife for help all the time. It's cruel. But then he's like, but I could run a marathon. I just need a guide. That move from focusing on your disability to your ability, this was the magic move. It created this amazing opening. And he's having a greater positive impact on the world than I think he ever would have had he not lost his eyesight. It's terrible that he lost his eyesight, but you see what he did? And so can you. Whenever I talk about Dan, I ask people, how are you disabling yourself? We disable ourselves with our self-limiting beliefs. We disable ourselves by being sedentary and thinking that running a marathon is somehow like way beyond us. Maybe, but not really. Your body's designed to do it. You just have to train. We disable ourselves when we have self-limiting beliefs at work and imposter syndrome. Well, how about study what you need to study and get better? There's always a growth path. And focus on your ability instead of your disability is the way of thinking, and Dan represents that. And that's the gift he gave to me. I found it incredible. I love this. I could talk a lot longer about Dan. I'll stop, but he's amazing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I mean, but you're so right though. I was like, he could have just stayed in that state of, depression forever. And then look what he would have missed out on and the lives that he was able to impact. You're right. He most likely would have never started this organization and helped this many people if he would have kept his eyesight. So something like a tragedy, something terrible. He shifted the mind. I love that. That's an amazing story. Which I want to talk about that after this too. Because I feel like I have some people that would be great for. So I want to talk more about that after.
Sure.
Okay, another question. So I think many high performing execs believe that this achievement comes at like what you said, the cost of the personal health, the family life, being able to have that, like prioritize those things. How do you help leaders reframe that without sacrificing the well-being? Is that kind of the like the loop that you talked about?
Yeah, that's step two. I'll say so. Wealth exercise is step two, but step one is change this way of thinking. In our culture, there are many examples of people who undermine their physical health and emotional health in pursuit of their professional goals, and they actually brag about it. Some people brag about, I had to choose between my wife or my business, and I chose my business, as if that's what I brag about. And what I encourage people to do is to change their mindset. And I think the reason that we have this dominant narrative of like, you work hard and you sacrifice is in part because of the importance of hard work. So our culture celebrates hard work. So do I. You want to be successful in life, you want to be satisfied in life. The answer is hard work. I couldn't agree more. It starts with hard work. So hard work is the answer until it isn't. So this is the move. Go towards hard work, develop discipline. There's a bunch of stuff here. And what I do when I'm working with executives, we start with this concept from endurance athletics that is all about optimizing performance. So I want you to make more money. I want you to beat your competition. I want you to be professionally successful. It's really important. And I love it. And then we spend a bunch of time there. But then there's a point after which you get diminishing returns. So hard work is the answer until it isn't. The mistake these people are making that you were describing is they don't know where that line is. They cross it and then they continue to put their emphasis on hard work. Now I call that the road to mediocrity. This undermines you in so many ways that in the end you don't even get the thing you're looking for, which was professional success, because you've undermined so many other parts of your life. So realize it's a choice to continue to work hard when it's time to stop working hard. The discipline is to know when to be in work mode and when to be in rest and recovery mode. And the line that I use is rest and recovery. You want to treat it with the same respect as you treat hard work. Google LeBron James and sleep, for example, to see what LeBron James, this wonderful basketball player, says about sleep. He calls sleep his competitive weapon. He approaches rest and recovery, in other words, with the same competitive intensity he approaches the game of basketball, where he makes his money. Many athletes, when I work with athletes, I don't even have to talk about this. All excellent athletes get this, because rest and recovery is where you get stronger. You break your body down in the workout, and then you rest and recover and eat healthy foods, and you get stronger. So athletes get this. So many business people have still not learned this obvious lesson that all the athletes figured out. And it's to understand, treat rest and recovery with the same respect as hard work. So that's step one. Then step two is we do the wealth exercise. So now that you understand this importance, you then try to figure out how do you invest in, of course, material wealth, but also physical health, emotional health, vitality, and spirituality in such a way that you create a positive feedback loop. So you invest in all of them and you protect them from one another, right? So the counterexample would be someone who gets obsessed with Ironman triathlons, who's training 30 hours a week and is undermining their business relationships because they're training all the time. Now you're letting the physical health investment do damage to your material wealth investment. That's not okay with me either. So there's a balance, there's a blending of these in a way that makes it work. So that's step two, is to kind of create this positive feedback loop. And then the final piece of advice is to realize, if you think about broadly, like, what does success look like? What are we designed to do as creatures? Human beings are relational creatures. We thrive on healthy relationships. Business is relationships, right? Relationships are the answer. The Harvard longitudinal study on adult development has been around since 1937. Dr. Robert Waldinger is the current head of it. He wrote a very interesting book called The Good Life, where he summarizes this. If your listeners want to dig into it, that's the book, The Good Life by Dr. Robert Waldinger. This is a longitudinal study, meaning it tracks people until they die, and then their children. So this study that started in 1937 is still going on. His analysis is there's a bunch of stuff that's important to do to thrive in life. It includes all the stuff we've talked about, right? Eating a moderate amount of healthy foods, exercising regularly, moderate alcohol consumption, don't smoke. There's a bunch of stuff in there. But the most important thing that you can do to have a long, healthy life, for your health span to match your lifespan, would be another way to put it, is to invest in healthy relationships. And this is the mistake I see many business people make, is they trash their relationships because they're too busy working. It's not worth it, and it actually doesn't even work. It's the road to mediocrity again. So as you start to understand this concept, you see how the change in mindset and then the practice itself, that's very difficult, but you get a mentor and a peer group and you work on it daily, then starts to produce this positive feedback loop that enhances your relationships. And then now you're thriving and making more money. And this whole premise that I'm supposed to like undermine all that just because I've got to work so hard, it just falls away. And you're looking at that old version of yourself and wondering, why in the world did I fall for that way of thinking? It doesn't make sense. And it doesn't even work, in my opinion.
Dang. I have nothing else. I feel like that right there was like hit the nail on the head. There's something that I really will take away from this, that you keep coming back to, is how you've shifted it from the work-life balance to the work-life blend. Like, that is such a good motto. I love that. That is absolutely amazing.
What it means is every day is a practice, and every day you have to wake up, prove it to yourself again. There's no arrival.
Yep. For sure. Awesome. Well, to wrap it all up, we've been talking with executive mentor Charles Scott. Charles, can you tell us where people can learn more about you and what you do?
Sure. My website is executivementorcharlescott.com. So you can find me there. And my email is charles@executivementorcharlescott.com. So feel free to send an email if you want. And what I do is I every quarter I offer an 8-week executive mentoring workshop where all these things we've talked about, we turn them into a practice. So if that's of interest, then just send me an email. And what I'll do is I'll send you 12 diagnostic questions. I start with a 1-hour diagnostic conversation where I ask you to answer in writing 12 questions. And then we spend an hour going through your answers. And I give you feedback on your answers and ask you to explain them more and look for what issues matter to you and the growth path. And if it's a fit and I can be a resource for you, I'll invite you to join that workshop. And then from there, people continue on to an executive mastermind model where we meet monthly in small groups. And I've worked with people for years this way. So this is how I put myself out there in the world. And, for some people, I'm a great resource. And if that's, somebody thinks I could be, I'm happy to talk with them.
Awesome. Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much. This was absolutely great, and I really appreciate you being on the show.
Thank you, Danielle. It was lovely to talk with you too.